I've played a lot of strategy games over the years, but I don't think I've ever started one that felt quite as overwhelming as Songs of Syx. Even in the opening menus, it's complicated to figure out what exactly you're trying to do. But even beyond that, once you get into the actual game, you're hit with this wildly confusing interface that, for a newcomer, makes almost no sense to anybody. You really need to put in the time and effort and almost certainly do some online searches to figure out how to even get started in this game. But if you're like me, that might be the exact thing you're looking for and the exact reason why this game holds up after so many years to so many people. Songs of Syx is an incredibly compelling colony builder, city builder, and even empire builder if you get that far. So, even despite its overwhelming UI, its many hidden menus that hide lots of very important information, and just the overall obtuseness of it, I still find Songs of Syx to be an incredibly engaging and fun colony builder to play, and I keep coming back to it every time there's a new update. I should mention off the top that this game is currently in early access and has been for several years. Right now, it is in version 71, and the dev has mentioned the idea of version 1.0 coming out in the somewhat near future. But sometimes he changes his mind and decides to do little updates instead, so it's not a guarantee. However, one really awesome thing is that the dev allows everybody to download a demo of Songs of Syx, which includes the full version of the previous update. And I consider that to be essentially a copy of the full entire game, just operating on some different rule sets and maybe a couple systems here or there that haven't been implemented yet. So, if you're looking at this video and the thought of this game intrigues you, make sure you check out the free demo on Steam and check out some guides online, whether it's YouTube or anywhere else. I personally really like Icon Gaming on YouTube. He taught me a lot of what I know about this game, so give him a look. But regardless of that, let's move on to the actual video about why I am recommending you to play Songs of Syx if you're interested in this type of game. At a basic level, Songs of Syx is generally a city builder slash colony builder with more aspects of kingdom management as you get into the later game. It runs at real time, although it does give you the ability to pause and plan out your builds. There's several different speeds as well to play the game at, including a ultra speed. If you double tap the triple speed, it gives you ultra speed, which runs even faster. And you essentially plan out your city. You build houses, you build farms, you build markets, warehouses, bakeries, carpenters, all sorts of things, all the way up to even later game things like nurseries and hospitals, and some things I haven't even been able to unlock yet. I think one of the most awesome aspects of this game is the gigantic scale that it operates at. But it doesn't seem like that at first. You start with a handful of units, usually about 10 units of a few different races that are available to you. Each race has its own playstyle and strengths and weaknesses. You've got humans, Dondorians, which are like dwarves, Cretonians, which are like elves. There's fish people, bug people, and like an offset of elves as well. I won't go into all the details, but if you're interested, you can explore them and find out which one makes the most sense for you. I tend to play the humans most often because I find them the most easy to understand. But as you start with this small little colony of 10 people, it can very easily grow to a gigantic city of thousands of people, each with their own names and a little bit of backstory, with their own jobs, their own homes that they live in, and their own routines that they go about throughout their day. It really makes the world feel like a living world. The citizens aren't just doing things at random. They're doing things that their interests are pulling them towards, and what their job is pulling them towards, and what their needs is pulling them towards. As you start to build your colony, you start to realize the importance of production chains. So, for example, you might make a woodcutter or even just cut down trees yourself with a direct order to chop down trees. And then that wood can be refined into furniture, which you will need to build some more mid-tier buildings. Or you'll have a grain farm that produces grain which can't be eaten on its own. The grain can be brought into a bakery, which is then turned into bread, which is food that is preferable by humans. Each race prefers their own certain types of food, so you want to focus on producing the food that they like. And those are basic, kind of obvious examples of production chain, but it really does go into much bigger and much more complicated logistics that you'll start to see as you play the game. In fact, the logistics is basically an extremely important part of the game itself, which I find I have the most trouble with because it just gets so complicated on a big city level that you need to have some internal knowledge of logistics yourself or be ready to learn them, because otherwise you will find things getting bottlenecked all over the place and it's difficult to manage. But it's part of the fun of the game. The immigration system is very good because you have some options. You can either set an automatic immigration allowance to allow people to just come in whenever they want up to a certain amount of population. I actually recommend taking a more careful approach to letting people in and let them in smaller chunks so that you don't put a big strain on your food resource, which is incredibly important. If you've played the game before and you've already had a few saves that have either gone well or gone terribly, then you'll start to understand that you can actually plan out vast portions of your city before you even start the game. Once you spawn in on your map and you take a look where all the resources are, where the water is, where the roads are, where the mountains are, you can start to plan out your entire city if you want. Although I don't recommend setting gigantic build plans because it'll take your citizens forever to do that, and you'll end up either starving or freezing or something else going terribly wrong. Once you start producing goods, you can actually sell them off via the diplomacy menu, which is hard to find and understand. But once you get that general idea, you can actually sell off your access goods for money, which you can then use that money to purchase other resources that are maybe more difficult for you to obtain on your map. The freedom to play the game however you want is really another massive draw to Songs of Syx. If you like, you can use the diplomacy pretty heavily and purchase all of the refined goods you need. Or if you want, you can try to be fully self-sustaining and do everything yourself. You can build gigantic farms or many small farms or small buildings or big buildings. It really is up to you how you want to play the game, and that's a lot of fun. Another thing to touch on is each building is customizable on its own. Let's use the bakery as an example. You don't just drop down a bakery like you do in many other colony simulators. Instead, what you do is you draw out the walls, and then within the walls, you put the ovens, and you, depending on how big your building is, you can put however many ovens will fit within that building. You also need to make sure there's storage for the finished good in that building, and then auxiliary stations, which increase the efficiency of those workstations inside the building. So if you make a much larger bakery, you can fit a ton of ovens in there and get much more production and employ much more people. Or you can go the smaller route, which is generally preferred at the beginning of the game when you're really just trying to get some of the initial starting products that you need to grow your city. All of these aspects combine to make the game incredibly replayable, and probably one of the most replayable colony builders I've ever played. And that's usually because you'll get off to a terrible start your first save and restart. And then you'll get a little better. You might not starve to death immediately, but then you freeze to death and you start over. So then, okay, you start another save where, okay, you're not going to starve to death, you're not going to freeze to death, but then something else happens that just totally sets you back. And it really drives home that feeling of wanting to restart and get a perfect start. But at the same time, that is not necessary. Even if your people starve to death or freeze to death, more immigrants will come in and kind of pick up the slack where they left off. So in any game I've ever played, I've never actually totally lost. I usually just restart on my own because that's what I want to do. But in truth, you can just kind of keep pushing through, try to fix the problems, and eventually you can get back up on your feet. And at a pretty basic level, that's really the whole gist of Songs of Syx and where all the fun comes from. It's a learning experience from start to finish. As mentioned, you'll start a save and you'll fail because probably food. And then you'll be like, okay, I know how I can fix that. Let me try again. And you do fix it. And then, like I said again, usually you'll freeze to death. And then you'll say, okay, I won't let that happen again. I've learned my lesson. I know how to do food. I know how to do housing to stop myself from freezing. So you try again. And things seem to be going well. And then you grow too quickly. And then guess what? You starve to death again because it really takes a lot of understanding how the food storage works before you really can build your city to larger levels into the hundreds and even then thousands after that. But that's where the draw comes from. And if you're like me, you'll find yourself thinking about how can I build a new city while you're eating supper with your wife or while you're going to bed? You're thinking, okay, last time I tried this. Well, maybe next time I'll try this new race and try to go this approach. Maybe this time I'll stock up on a whole bunch of furniture, sell it all off, and then use the money I get to purchase the things that were giving me trouble before. It's just a never ending learning experience, at least for me. And that is what I like so much about it. And even still, the more you think you know about the game, the more things you realize you don't know. When you start going into the deeper menus, we'll use humans as an example, where you can see what makes them happy. What are the different services that they need in order to be happy? You need your people to be happy in order to grow the population, because that's what draws immigration in. You'll see things like, what type of buildings do they like? Do they like wood buildings, stone buildings? Some people like mud buildings. Do they need round buildings or square buildings? Do they need this type of religion to pray to, or maybe all types of religion? Do they need more bathrooms? Do they need more wells? Do they need more hospitals or fighting pits or training arenas or all sorts of things? There's all these different bars you can look at, and each of those is basically a new aspect of the game that you need to learn about, all while keeping the rest of your system in place without falling apart, which will happen. You might have a perfectly stable 300 population city that seems like it can't fail, and then you let in a bunch more new people in order to fulfill some sort of service that you were trying to build, but then you overstrain your food stores without realizing, and people will start to die. There's also the tech tree, which I find to be quite complicated and is consistently getting reworked every time the game is updated. It feels like every time I come into this game, the tech tree has changed. There's different types of technology now. You have innovation, which you use for certain types of technology, and then there's knowledge, which you use for other types of technology. And I would probably put this in one of the weakness sections of the game. I love the fact that there is a technology tree. I just think it needs to be balanced, and I think the dev knows that, which is why every update it does get balanced and changed around. I would like to see it get into a more consistent state so that I can start to figure out exactly what I need to work towards, because you'll find yourself thinking, okay, I want to go out to war soon, but you don't really know what technologies you need to be able to do that. You can't just make archers. You need to have specific tech training to get an archery range up to train them, but you also need other tech to be able to even make bows to begin with. So that's just one aspect of how complicated that tech tree can get, but another aspect of how it's a constant learning experience. Every time you move to a new stage of the game, it's just learning all over again. And I like learning, so that's why these types of games appeal to me. Now, as much of a fan of Songs of Syx that I have been for several years now, ever since I first played it, I can't even remember how many years back, it is absolutely not going to be for everybody. And if you've made it this far, you already know if you're going to like this kind of game or not. The onboarding experience is incredibly difficult to get into, but if you like learning new systems and really sinking your teeth into a new experience, then you might actually like that part of it. I wouldn't say the UI is bad necessarily, it's just difficult to understand at first. Once you know where everything is, it actually is pretty well done, and you can start to navigate it much more comfortably. Same thing goes with the information. Like, some of this information, if you're new to the game, you would not even know to look for it. And it's hidden behind a couple different tiny little buttons. But once you know where it is and you know how to navigate, you know what you're looking for, yeah, the buttons are a little bit small, but that helps keep the UI compact and give you more of your city to look at rather than gigantic interfaces everywhere. The early game is very difficult. I've already gone over that. But luckily, that's the early game, and it really doesn't take too much effort to restart. You can even reload the same map and restart again. So, yes, the early game is difficult, and there will absolutely be some trial and error in your experience. Some people will see that as a weakness. I see it as a fundamental part of enjoying the experience, but again, this game is not going to be for everybody. Finally, I need to touch on a little bit of the elephant in the room here. The warfare and the diplomacy that you get once you get to the kind of empire state of the game, the late game, is very difficult to get to. I have not managed to do it myself yet. In my most recent playthrough, I tried to get some warfare going so I could show some footage, but every time I went to move out, there was some other hassle that was stopping me from doing it. The army depot is impossible to understand. I don't know how it works. Apparently, you're supposed to have it stocked up for your army to move out, but I couldn't get that to work. And even if I could get it to work, by the time I had army units to actually send out, the rest of the civilizations around the place had already gathered up all the easy targets. So I didn't really feel like I had anything to target with my army, even if I couldn't move them out. So that is not necessarily a weakness. It's just another example of how difficult and how many systems there are to learn. And some people are going to see that as a weakness. The best advice I can give to new players coming into this game for the first time is just take it slow and click on all the little buttons at first. Get to know where the information is, especially in the top left corner. Additionally, make sure you make a warehouse because you need a warehouse to actually keep track of your inventory. When it's just sitting in your throne, it's not tracked. You don't know how much of whatever you have, especially food, because that's how you're going to know when you can start to expand and allow more people into your colony. And as mentioned previously, check out guides, especially on YouTube. It's going to be very helpful. You'll save yourself a lot of time by watching a couple Let's Plays or a couple guide videos in order to get yourself set up on the right foot. And that is going to do it for today's video. I really want to thank you all if you've made it this far in the video. Thank you so much. Apologies for the delay in this one coming out, but it's here now, and I really appreciate your time. Stay tuned for the next one coming out, hopefully within the next week or so, and I will see you next time.